got to meet him through Steak and Cake Records as I got more and more into the music community after moving here from Florida. I got to meet him and a lot of the different musicians that he's worked with. But one of the things that always impressed me about Brand was his creativity and just kind of the things that he's kind of added to the culture, the artistic culture of Buffalo, not just in music, but as we can see tonight through film as well. So we're doing this little Q&A session. Hopefully everybody got their questions in. If not, maybe we'll have some time to ask them as well. But let's welcome Brand up here to get
Thanks, Chris.
Of course.
You're a little cozy.
So this is like a part 3. So it's kind of a cool thing. When I started 716 The Sound, the first guest I wanted to have on the show was Brand. He was my very first guest, and he was actually the first person to come back as a returning guest as well. So this is like a part 3 now to our conversations and our interviews. So let's get into it. There's some questions here that folks had for you, and there's not much time, so we're going to start with one of the hard-hitting questions. Do you run for real, or are you a fake runner? Start with that one.
Yeah, so I guess in good grief I was running a little bit, and I used to be a runner, a real runner, and then I got old and my knee just didn't want to do it anymore, so there's no more running for me. I'm a cyclist now, that's the main thing, so no more running.
Just fake running.
Just fake running.
Okay. Okay, let's start with a movie one. What's your favorite movie?
I usually have to default to Tommy Boy. That is my number one.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that movie.
Cinematic perfection.
You know, I guess as far as like my sense of humor on screen, that's definitely drawn from that. But the cinematography of that film is pretty straight up 90s, you know, SNL style. But I'm drawn to other people like Wim Wenders is a big guy for me. I think it's in the program that he's a huge influence on the road films. So Maxine wouldn't really happen without knowing his work. And there's just so many others, Kubrick and Villeneuve, and just people that are, just have mastered the craft. And I like to watch how they move the camera and how they make their presence known without being in front of it. It's really interesting to me.
It's interesting to me that when you and I had a discussion on the last time you were on the show, you made a comment about not being a fan of road trips.
Yeah.
However, a few of your films have a lot of road travel in them.
That's right, we were just talking about this. I think I also wrote this in the program that it's easier for me to imprint sort of a creative routine on a trip to enjoy it. Oftentimes if I'm leaving my creative routine behind, it's a little more difficult to feel comfortable out there, outside my home base. And so, thank you to Jazz, especially for putting up with that whole experiment. We took, I think, 40, That one's actually, I think, 4 different trips stitched together that look like one. So, yeah.
Where do you see your influences emerge most distinctly in your own work?
Well, so I guess I started in comedy. I started in like absurdist comedy and got a feel for how to set up a joke and sort of knock it down. I feel like the best storytelling is kind of the same thing in long form. And so I try to find a way to get everything built on contingencies to go from point A to point B, and that things reveal themselves along the way. Like in the film, the last film that's going to close out tonight, I think is a really good example of that contingency style that I have. So I guess watch for that.
Awesome. After years of filmmaking, what do you wish you knew about the art that you didn't know then, but you know now? Whether it's camera work, dialogue, lighting, directing, etc.
Man, you know what? I wish that I had a better understanding of sound in the beginning. I guess it's the thing that you think about the visual first, but you get all of your footage into your DAW and you're starting to work through the session and realizing like, oh man, sound is tough. Even just a fan going in the background can ruin a whole set of dialogue, you know? So I guess making a bunch of mistakes in the beginning taught me what to look out for. I wish I had known that, but in a way, I think you can only sort of learn it by making mistakes.
That's typically the way, right?
Yeah.
Make as many mistakes as possible, get better at it.
That's right.
What was your biggest filmmaking disaster?
Disaster. I guess it's true that oftentimes when I try to make a film, the cast that I have in mind originally doesn't often translate to the screen. There's usually like a 2-week window where people just sort of drop out. Sometimes it's like, I don't know if I'm comfortable doing this. Sometimes like a wave of sickness goes through everybody, and like just sort of scrambling to replace those people. It always works out though. I was just talking to Brady about this, that sometimes the recasting is better than the original casting. And so I feel like with films, a lot of it is in fate's hands. You just gotta kind of surrender to the process and accept what is in front of you and make the best of it. And so the disaster might be a disaster in the beginning, but in the end it feels necessary.
This is interesting. Talk about the supernatural themes in Emma Ames and Good Grief. Was that a stylistic choice or a spiritual moment?
In the beginning of making films, I'm sorry, I'm repeating some of the stuff that's in the program here, but basically it was easier to ask questions than to answer them. And I've always been spiritual, a seeker, looking for answers, and I think in those two films I'm asking questions without feeling a lot of like immediacy to resolve them. I guess David Lynch is a good example of someone you can watch and just sort of feel like you're along for the ride rather than feeling like you're trying to get to some sort of resolution or understanding. It was a conscious choice to explore the themes, but I think that is all I could do at that time. I'm a much better storyteller now, having sort of gone through that.
I noticed in some of the films we were watching tonight, and you really kind of have to catch it. There are a few times in different films where you do a lot of reverse motion. There was one scene where there was the ocean waves where it was actually going in reverse. And you don't really notice that. Now, is that stylistic? Or is there a reason? Is there more like a subtext behind that? You just enjoy that? You kind of like the look of it?
It's a good question because as I'm making those choices in the process, I'm not thinking consciously about it really. On reflection, and especially watching all the films together like this, time is like such a point of focus for my films. Memories and just the act of remembering. So I think it's got to be in some way intentional on a subconscious level to play with time moving forward and time moving backward, or not knowing where you are in time. I think that's a big point for me.
Okay, here's one. Do you have in your notes in one of the programs something about the Gary? So tell us about the Gary, because Mom and Dad want to know.
Mom and Dad want to know. Okay.
The Gary. Tell us about the Gary.
The Gary is how I think the term is cut my teeth. I figured out how to make films by making them at the Gary. The Gary is a garage that we called the Gary, and a bunch of my buddies and I would hang out. We'd have a few beers out there, and one thing or another would come up, and we developed sort of like a sketch comedy style show out of it. And this thing would happen, randomly for a couple months in the summer. Put all the sketches together, and you had kind of like a season's worth of comedy. And like I said in the beginning, figuring out how to, first of all, we would get together and we'd write the film on the spot, so it was improvised. And you'd have to create sort of a path where you have the introduction of the characters and then the resolution of the action. And to do that in like 15 minutes before we just start rolling is, it teaches you a lot about stripping away the fact, we don't need that. Let's just use this and get to where we're going. So that's the Gary. And it's worth checking out. It's a little weird, but it's pretty fun.
You've been making movies over a decade, over 10 years of making films.
Yeah.
Of your films, which one would you say was probably the most effortless one, probably the easiest to make? And then alternatively, which was the most difficult?
The easiest one to make, I think, was called This One's a Whale, which is we saw the sequel tonight. Good Show is the sequel to that film. And again, there was a disaster in the beginning of that movie where the band that I had sort of signed on to play themselves all bailed pretty much at the last second. And the actors that I did get, they graciously just accepted with like 2 weeks of time to come on screen. And when I had to throw out the entire script and rewrite it in 2 weeks, I just trusted that the scenery, the sort of emotional core of the film, and the actors who were on screen could kind of carry it. It was like a hangout movie more than like a move the plot forward movie. And so I almost had made peace with the fact that the film wasn't going to happen, or whatever it's going to be, it's going to be. And if you can go into it with that mindset, I feel like that's so important. And it felt easy for that reason. The hardest film to make, no question, is the last film, the newest one, Big Mistake. Again, everyone that was cast quit beforehand, but this time I also got a major sinus infection on the first day of shooting, so it's really hard to look through like a camera when like I can't really look at anything. And we also had an actor who lived in Philadelphia and was only home for the weekend, so it was like really scrambled. I thought I was going to have like a couple months to shoot it. I had like 3 days, so it was high stress. But it all worked out, and sometimes films feel like they don't want to get made. It's definitely something that's like consistently been true. None more so than this one. And to reach the finish line on it felt like a huge accomplishment.
Nice. So I had a few questions here myself as well, because we have our conversations. You've been on the show a few times, but every time we talk, it feels like an hour just blinks and goes by. And there's so many things I wanted to talk to you about. One of the things I wanted to know was, so how would you describe your voice or your style as a filmmaker?
I think it's hard to sort of qualify it, because it comes from a lot of different places, and depending on the genre I'm working in, a lot of different influences are at play. So I really do believe that Tommy Boy is like a huge reference point for me. Pete and Pete, the show Pete and Pete, is also just like the way that the stories unfold and the way that they're told. I internalized that as like, a 13-year-old, and somehow now at 40, it's like really finding its way into my work. So it's just hard to know when it's happening, what I'm doing. A lot of the times, Brandon and I just talked about this, I really don't know what the end of the film is going to be. That's how like the first 5 to 7 years of filmmaking was just like, I'll start and figure it out. Now I feel like I'm going in with a little more intention.
Do you typically think about your audience when you're making your film? Like the film that you're working on, do you think to yourself, how are people going to see this? Or I want them to take this away from the film?
Maybe that is somewhere in the back of my mind, but the first thing that I think about is when do I need to cut so that the audience isn't bored? Like, I feel like a lot of times I don't give myself a long runway on stuff. It's like someone says a line and it's cut to the next line. And so I think I'm always embodying an anxious audience spirit, like let's go, and hopefully that helps the pace of the films will move along.
Gotcha. Anybody else have a question out there before we wrap it up here? I have one more that I want to ask you, but I'm going to hold that one off to the end.
Okay. Anybody? Jasmine?
Where do people find your stuff to watch? Like, if they weren't able to come today, like, where do we go?
Yeah, it's a good question because I've struggled with it. I have some of them on YouTube. Basically what I've done is a year after the film is complete, I release it for free on YouTube. But in the meantime, it lives on Patreon. And sometimes newer things get put there that don't ever really make it to the YouTube, and so I guess it's worth it to subscribe. You can, I think it's like $3 or $5 or something. You can see the whole catalog of what I've done. And the bigger question is like how to make it easy to engage with films, because it is such an active experience. It's really not passive. You have to sit down and watch it. So I don't know, I don't share them a lot, but maybe I should.
Yeah. What's the website?
Head Shrinker Studios is the name of the filmmaking thing, So if you look that up on YouTube or Patreon, you'll find it. Awesome, thanks.
All right, 2 more questions.
Yes.
So what advice would you give emerging filmmakers after doing this for as many years as you have? Made the mistakes, learned what you needed to learn. What kind of advice would you give emerging filmmakers?
I think it's there's 2 parts. Like, don't wait to make something. just start making it. And the other side is don't aim for perfection, just aim for a completed product. Like we talked about throughout this conversation, I just feel like I get better with each one, and you've got to make the bad ones to make the good ones. And so you might think to yourself, you might like make the first film and then watch it back and cringe as a new filmmaker, but cringe is good. It's what shows you that you know what to do better next time.
You still have the cringe? Do you other ones you watch where you go, oh, I wish I didn't do that. I wish I could go back and change it.
We didn't show any of those.
Lastly, this is one I was really interested in knowing. So what do you hope people remember or feel after watching your work?
Well, like I said, I feel like I'm a seeker at heart, and I do try and pose spiritual questions. Sometimes the spirituality, the question is more relationship-based, but I think that if anything, you can see characters sort of on an arc. You're looking at them face a challenge and try to figure it out a way through. And sometimes it's really messy. Sometimes it doesn't make sense. Sometimes it's really unresolved. You know, the end of Maxine is very unresolved and kind of brutal in the way it plays out, but it's also life in a way too. And so I hope that it's entertaining, but you know, it's art.
Excellent. Brandon, thank you so much.
Thank you,
This
Chris.
was awesome.
Woo!
Three more movies. That's it, yeah.
Awesome.
And everybody make sure you look up Chris, 716 The Sound Podcast, okay?
Woo!
Thank you, guys. Keep it going.